Well, good morning, everyone. Uh, Welcome to my apartment. I'm broadcasting to you live in the same exact pajamas that I've been in probably the entire week. If you watched or watch at some point today the pre-session, which you can see on the top bar, in the pre-session, I talk about ways that you can learn with the Educator Collaborative in this virtual world that we're in right now. You'll notice that I'm wearing the same exact clothes because that's what we do now. I also could say hi and welcome to another Zoom meeting because we don't ever seem to stop those either. I'm here right now in Queens, New York, here in New York City. Queens is kind of the epicenter of the current outbreak here in the United States. We've been having a very weird celebration, if you'd even call it a celebration, or I guess it's not, it's more hope. Our strange hope is that instead of more than 700 people dying every day in our city, we now have hope because more than only 600 people die per day in our city. It's a dark, strange feeling to try to find hope in so much loss. One thing I wanted to do before we do anything else this morning is to recognize that we're all grieving right now for many different reasons, but for all the same global reason too. Uh, there's a way where if you're quiet enough, you can almost feel everyone's grief. You can almost feel the way that no matter where you are in the globe, we all together, all at once, are going through stages that feel impossible at times. The stages of grief happen as humans anytime things are different, anytime things are taken from us, or anytime we have to let go. Anytime there are changes, we go through those, you know them, anger, bargaining, denial, all in a path towards acceptance. And yet there's a way where this right now doesn't feel like we may ever quite get fully to that acceptance. One thing we also want to acknowledge this morning is that while all of our grief is valid, while all of us have feelings in different ways at different times, but they are true and valid and okay, that there are some of us that have particular loss right now. Almost all of us know someone, either in our circles or in our close circles or just beyond, that we've lost or that are perhaps currently fighting. And so what I'd like to do this morning is just to take a very brief moment, if we could hold in your thoughts someone that you know, someone that perhaps you have lost or that is currently fighting, or hold in your thoughts others that you know are grieving now. And in those thoughts, you can share your strength with them, or you can just remember. But if you could join me for just a moment to hold some silence together and to honor those people who have fought. And if you'd like to do so even more publicly, we invite you to, if you're comfortable and you'd like to please use the hashtag TheEdCollab gathering. And there, if you'd like to, you can share a story or a memory or even just a name to hashtag TheEdCollab gathering. Or if you don't want to make it quite so public, we invite you to do so perhaps on your own Twitter handle, or just write it down, or in any way that you'd like. We're all here together. We honor you. Whew. So I have more things to say, but to get myself out of potentially crying right in front of you, I'll ask, if you're like me, there's been random times across this time that you just have to let go. But to help myself get out of that moment for a minute, let's talk about today. If this is the first time that you have ever been at an EdCollab gathering, welcome. We are so glad that you're here, and we're looking forward to spending this day with you. If you've been here before, welcome back to the family. Today's always an exciting day. There are a few things that are different about this EdCollab gathering than normal, not by a lot, but just a few important things. One is typically this is a day that's all live and all volunteer. We have people who submit proposals and members of our family and invited friends who lead sessions all day long. And we have this incredible volunteer tech team who during the day, we're all frantically on Voxer together, all at the same time, sending messages about, did the stream go up? Did the stream not go up? What's going on? Because of this pandemic, and to recognize and honor the fact that this is not normal, that this is not digital learning, this is not online learning, this is not online school. This is a crisis that we are trying to do our best to hold each other together around, and honoring that in that fact, things aren't the way that they were. What we've decided to do as a community is to pre-record all of the sessions except for my remarks here and my remarks at the end of the day. Everything else is pre-recorded. And that's so presenters and tech team hosts could handle whatever they needed to handle whenever they could. So we don't know what's happening in anyone's life at any given moment, including today. So all sessions are pre-recorded. So what that means is that when you go to any session page, let me share my screen again. When you go to any session page, you will see, here we go. You will see something that looks like what's in the left there at first. There's Dr. Carey's session that's coming up, workshop coming up in the first session. On that page, it may just say, the session will appear here soon. That's because we have the pre-recorded links, but what we'd like to do is release them across the day. So that way, even though they're pre-recorded, we could follow along as a community as the sessions post. So right at the hour, so at 10 a.m. Eastern, or excuse me, yes, at 10 a.m. Eastern, and this is true for the keynotes too, at 10 a.m. Eastern, at 11 a.m. Eastern, at noon Eastern, or whatever your time zone is, just hit refresh on your page. And if everything's gone according to plan, then the video player should show up, which is this little box over here. It'll either autoplay or you'll have to just hit play, and then you'll get to watch. If you don't see it right at the hour, that means that something happened behind the scenes with us. I'm trying to get that link up. Just keep hitting refresh. You also can go to our Twitter handle at TheEdCollab, and there we also will post the links to all of the videos. So that's how you'll watch across the day. The way to access those videos is just go to our main website. On the top menu bar there, you'll just hover over the session. And then you can scroll down. If you click on agenda at the glance, you'll see the starting times of each session and ones that are taking place, as well as if there's been any session changes. You'll see all of that on the agenda. So you just click on the page that you'd like. So like, let's say I want to watch Dr. Carey's session, then I will just wait until I see the video screen show up. I might have to hit refresh. And then I can watch the session. Because these sessions are not playing live, what we are going to ask you to do is, normally we'd say when you're tweeting or sharing on any sort of social media, please use hashtag TheEdCollab gathering and the workshop number. That way presenters can follow along with you. Because we didn't know what our agenda would 100% be until today, knowing that everyone's taping and doing things at different times, we didn't add any workshop numbers. So instead, we're going to ask across the day as you're watching, please, please, please do use the hashtag TheEdCollab gathering, mainly because presenters are watching along with you. So though their videos pre-recorded, they are here seeing your thoughts, answering your questions. So for example, when the keynote is posted on the page in just a few moments, when it's up there and you start watching, please use hashtag TheEdCollab gathering, because the opening keynote, the Distrupt Texts, will be following along with you, and they'll be commenting too. We ask you to, when you can, tag the presenters. Whenever we were able to, we had presenters' Twitter handles, and we dropped it in the bio right underneath where the video will play. So when you're on a session page, just scroll down and there you'll see their Twitter handle. Please do let them know that you're watching. It's a way that we can stay connected today. A few just other quick announcements. The TheEdCollab gathering is always a free day. There is no registration. You can join when you'd like, leave when you'd like, and all the sessions are on for the entire season until the next one happens in fall. Because it's free and because there's no registration, we ask you every gathering to pay the joy forward. So if you go to our Adopted Charities page, the link is right there, or you can find it by going onto our website, and it's right off to the side, or you can click Adopted Charities link. We'll ask you to go to charities that were adopted by our opening and closing keynotes. You can read information about the charities, and there you can pay your joy forward. Consider what would you have paid for perhaps a cup of coffee during a conference day like this, or maybe if you grabbed lunch at the corner, if you were in person at a conference day like this, or to even think if I paid registration to go somewhere, or if I stayed in a hotel, whatever you're able to pay, we'd appreciate if instead of paying it to us or someone else, to pay the joy forward. Now, there's a few ways to do that. You could pay that to a charity. So you could pay that to one of the adopted charities. You could pay that to a charity that you would like to pay it towards. Or you can find another way during this pandemic that you'd like to support others, either monetarily or a way that you might volunteer some time. So we ask you to take the joy that you feel today. Anytime today you go, oh, wow, that was an amazing session. Holy cow, I learned so much. When you feel that joy fill you up, please consider paying it forward to one of our adopted charities or to anyone else in any other way that feels meaningful to you. A few quick things. The TheEdCollab, we're here putting on this free day, but we also thrive and survive because we work with educators and schools for free in ways that we learn and thrive on our community, and sometimes for free in ways that the expertise of our team can be valued and can allow the expertise of our team to, do things like pay the rent and have dinner and necessities that we all need. And so as a way to acknowledge our team's expertise and a way to keep learning with us, if you click on pre-session, which is at the top of our menu bar, at any time today or after today, I'm doing another session in these same exact pajamas with a helicopter that goes off outside. You can watch that session to learn about ways to learn with us. These are everything from free and low cost for individual educators, all the way up to ways that schools can learn with us in what we're calling this not normal time right now. So you can join us there and you'll learn a lot more. One of the things we'd like to highlight is that we have a whole bunch of things we can do in a virtual learning platform or in this virtual learning space we're in right now. What I do say there, and I do want to say to all of you here, again, this is not normal. This is not school. This is not distance learning. This is all of us doing our best to hold each other together in an emergency. And so if anyone promises you that they have the solution for how you should learn now, you should highly question them. All of these ways that we can learn are ways that we've learned online before, or ways that we can adapt the things we know to do well. But what we have to tell you is we cannot promise you or your school or your district that we have the solution for now. All we can promise you is that we can be your partner in together figuring things out. So we'd love for you to check us out there. And one of which, I'm going a little bit over, one of which is our study series, which is typically for fee, is now pay what you're able. So we have 12 incredible sessions, many of which are already recorded, some of which are yet to still go live. There's 3 left. We'd love for you to head over to learning.theeducator collaborative page. There you can find a pay what you're able link, and you can pay anything from $0 to what it usually costs or anything in between. Just to say briefly, this is a difficult time for us as an organization too. We typically work with schools in person. We speak at conferences. We can't be in person anywhere right now. So one way that you could support us, if you're interested in it, is not to just donate to us, though that would be lovely, but not to do that. Instead, we'd love for you to learn with us. And so you can do so at that page. So thank you for that. A few quick final words, and then we'll move over to our keynote, and I'll tell you how to access that. So in thinking about this sort of virtual, kind of whatever you want to call this place, I do want to say, I don't know that any of us, teachers, leaders, um, staff development partners, authors, I don't know that any of us can ever feel 100% sure that we're doing everything right now. And I think we have to know that and accept it. I think we have to be kind to ourselves and know that as long as we are putting children at the center, as long as we are putting our colleagues at the center, as long as we are holding care in our hearts, that can lead us to the best right next decisions. What I do know is that there are many of us that have moments of breakthrough. There are moments where all of this never-ending noise that's happening around us feels a little bit clearer because we've connected to a student, or we've connected with a colleague, or we found a way to do things in our homes just a little bit differently. I think about Nia on Twitter, who shared just the other day that she had invited parents to set up one-to-one meetings with her kindergartners. And she said, I just had my first one. It was 30 minutes long, and my kindergartner never stopped talking the whole time, and it was great. It's those moments where we're leading with care that the noise around us can get a little quieter and we can feel a little more sure. But also know that if you're uncertain right now, it's normal, because none of this is certain. This is the New York Public Library. It's right behind Bryant Park here in New York City. And in front of the New York Public Library are two lion statues. Those lion statues were named in the 1930s by then Mayor LaGuardia, Patience and Fortitude. They had names before that. They actually were called like Lord Astor and something or other because of philanthropists that helped to fund the museum. But during the Great Depression in the 1930s, Mayor LaGuardia named those lions Patience and Fortitude. And he did that because he said, that's what we will need right now to get through this time, to get through the Great Depression, to get through the fear, the loss of income, the loss of stability, the uncertainty that people felt, patience and fortitude. So before we move over to our keynote this morning, what we'd love for you to do is think about, what are your words? What are the words that you need to hold on to, or are your mantra, or you remind yourself of? And please tweet those to the TheEdCollab gathering so that everyone can learn from them. Here are some of mine. Strength. One thing that I not only am trying to learn for myself, but I feel like I keep reminding others because I learned this in therapy, is that we're stronger than we know. That right now, when things are the hardest they may have ever been for many of us, we are stronger than we knew because you're doing it. So strength. Equity. I'm here in Queens. Queens is the epicenter of New York City. But when you look at a map of New York City, the highest number of cases are in the neighborhoods with the lowest amount of income, which, due to racist structures in our society, often tend to be the highest percentage of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Everything we know about structural inequity is true now too. So equity is something I'm holding on to, and it's a lens I'm bringing to what we see. And acceptance, trying to accept my feelings when things feel hard and impossible, accept when things take longer than they're supposed to. For example, I'm almost 10 minutes over when I thought I was going to stop, so my apologies for that. Everything seems to be taking longer. So please, if you'd like, share with us on hashtag TheEdCollab gathering some of your words. A quick shout out. People are viewing right now from around the world, from the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, India, Switzerland, Mexico, Netherlands, Singapore, France, hi Turkey, hi Italy, Australia, Austria, hi Japan, hi Hong Kong, hi Honduras, hi China, hi Saudi Arabia, hi Thailand, Indonesia, Costa Rica, the United Arab Emirates, Pakistan, Qatar, South Africa, and Vietnam are all tuned in right now live. Hi to all of you. We're so grateful to be a part of your community. And so now, I'm so happy and honored to introduce, and then I'll tell you how to go to our opening keynote for this morning. So Distrupt Texts, our colleagues and friends and members in education, they're a team of incredible women who you likely already follow them, but just to say, I am so incredibly in awe of and honored to know. They are women who have worked against incredible backlash over and over and over again to promote and highlight equity and identity and disrupting the ways that our hierarchies and our bias and racism in our country and in our school system have silenced voices. You can follow their work on the hashtag Disrupt Texts on their website, search for Disrupt Texts as well as all of their work individually. There you can see their Twitter handles, and when you're on this page, if you scroll down, you'll be able to see their bios as well. So because their session is recorded while mine is currently live, right now, if everything went according to plan, if you refresh your page, you'll see a link at the bottom to their opening sessions. You can hit play just as I finish up here. If for some reason you don't see it, that means we've done something wrong, and then just keep hitting refresh and you'll see it there as well. You also can access that link on their Twitter handle. Please remember, after their session's over, to join us across the day, clicking on any sessions that you'd like to watch. Every hour on the hour-ish, we'll upload new videos for that hour, so you'll kind of get to follow along. And please, please, please do reach out to presenters, because they'll be watching live along with you. And don't forget to donate to our charities for today. Anytime you feel that joy fill you up of learning or community, please consider giving it forward. So please join us at the end of today. I'll come back to you live, as long as nothing has made me not. I'll come back live at 3 p.m. Eastern, where we have some announcements, some thank yous for today, and then we'll lead into the final keynote. As always, and with the most full heart I could possibly have, thank you for all that you do for yourselves, for your families, for your colleagues, for your students, and for this amazing profession.
Good morning, everybody. We're so glad to be here with you. Thank you, Chris, and to everyone at the TheEdCollab for having the Disrupt Text team here with all of you this morning. We hope that you are all doing safe and well during this definitely challenging time, which adds a little bit more, I don't know, gravitas or something to our talk today, perhaps. But I want to just take a moment to go ahead and introduce ourselves briefly. So I'll go ahead and, well, I'll start with myself. I am Tricia Ebarvia, and I'm a high school English teacher outside of Philadelphia. I've been teaching since 2001, and I teach mostly 10th and 11th graders. And yeah, that's where I am. So I'll head over to Lorena.
Hey folks, I'm Lorena Germán, and I'm in Austin, Texas, and I work with middle and high schoolers teaching English, and I'm at a small independent school called Headwater School, and I'm just really happy to be here with all of you. Oh, Kim, go.
Hi, good morning. I am Kim Parker. I'm currently the Assistant Director of the Teacher Training Center at the Shady Hill School, where we prepare pre-service teachers, and I've been in classrooms for about 18 years. Nice to be here. Julia.
Hello, everybody. I'm Julia Torres. I'm a librarian in Denver Public Schools. I serve 5 schools on the Montbello campus in far northeast Denver. I have been a language arts teacher and librarian since 2005. So I'm just excited to be here with this amazing collective of women of color and excited to be able to present this information for all of you. We hope it's useful.
All right, so can you hear me? Yes? Okay, so one of the things that we wanted to start with is to ask yourselves to just take a moment to consider why you're here this morning, taking the time for this gathering, but also why you might be here listening to us talking about disrupt texts and what does disruption mean to you. And throughout this, we'll be asking some questions. We'll be walking through what we consider the 4 core principles of disrupt texts. And it always helps, I think, to have some like a text or a unit in mind, or even just your kids in mind. Like, keep your students centered during this conversation this morning, and think about what units or text you'll be struggling with, or something that you might want to reconsider. Think about the kids in your room. Just keep that in the background as you think this morning. So we just wanted to add that there. We go ahead and skip to slide 4 since we already introduced ourselves. So Lorena?
So we've got this slide here just to share big news. Some of you know, especially if you were at NCTE this past fall, but we are working on a book and it's coming out soon. And actually what we're going to be talking about this morning is the structure of that book. And so, we're taking a big leap of faith in sharing this information with all of you, and we're going to trust that you will cite our work, that you will cite our voices and our intellectual property as we're sharing it today. And that's why we say that citations are political, because oftentimes work written, done, and produced by women of color, in particular Black women, is stolen, right? Folks just use it and they don't say who wrote it and they don't give us any credit. And so we're asking that you cite us when you share about our work, when you share these ideas, whether it's online or in person with others, or if you're crafting PD for schools or educators, that you give us credit for the ways that our work has influenced yours. So the big news is that our book is coming, and we hope everybody is excited as we are for it to come as well.
Sorry about that, I'm muted. With that announcement, we have a official Distrupt Texts Twitter page that is going live today, and we have some exciting announcements that we will be rolling out for you through the website or through the Twitter page. It'll be a place where we can convene and where folks who are following our work can get the latest and greatest. So please make sure that you follow throughout. Feel free to tag us throughout the presentation, individually and collectively here. So yeah, there it is.
All right, so just this slide is just a little bit of a kind of in one slide, what does it actually mean to disrupt text? And disrupt text really means thinking about how we can create equitable and inclusive curriculum with the assumption that curriculum as it has been traditionally constructed has been one that is inflicts a kind of traditionally white-centered canon and pedagogy. So we want to try to repair that damage. And what that means is applying a critical lens, trying to think about the ways we can disrupt, yes, but also dismantle, reimagine, and rebuild curriculum, and to apply a pedagogy that values and amplifies the work of marginalized groups, particularly IBPOC communities. All students, students of color and white students, need to appreciate and study the rich literary legacies of communities of color. And I think in some ways too, those key words that are bolded there for you are ones to really sort of think about and, sort of meditate upon a little bit, that disrupt, dismantle, reimagine, and rebuild, to think about the ways that this can be a healing process in schooling. And just a quick sort of like caveat, what disrupt text is not. I think sometimes disrupt text, there are a lot of misconceptions sometimes, because whenever people are asked to change and reconsider their pedagogy, sometimes teachers do a thing, or human beings do a thing, where they go to the extreme. Like, are you telling me I have to throw everything out? Are you telling me this? Are you telling me that? Or they might go to things like, well, I do have some books by, these women, right? I have women writers, or I really do try to have diverse voices, but what does diverse really mean? And so we have to think about the ways in which, when we talk about disrupt text, our work is really about centering voices of color. And so that exchanging a book that's written by a white male for a book written by a white female is not what disrupt text is about. It's really about, have women been historically marginalized? Yes, but women of color have been marginalized in a different way. So it's important that we don't take race off the table, because race is often the first thing that often comes off the table when we're thinking about curriculum. So just to have that idea in mind as we're focusing on what equity actually means. So with this in mind, we're going to go ahead and talk about the 4 core principles. And we're going to start with Julia, who's going to tell us about number 1.
So when we think about interrogating our own biases to understand how they inform our teaching, something that's really important to understand, of course, we have this idea about unconscious bias. We've all got this notion of unconscious bias, right? But a lot of us are not aware of the fact that these biases shape policy. They shape the way that we run our schools. They inform everything. So it's not just about your personal biases, but it's about how these biases can show up in individuals who then structure different organizations and policies and then inform practice. So we've got to understand how our collective biases and how our individual biases work together, and how educational institutions are shaped by these. And they're not really forces that exist outside of us. They begin within us. So that's kind of an introduction to our first pillar. So in thinking about that, we've got to consider what we have to learn and what we have to unlearn. Some of the ideas that we've got to consider are, how do we define excellence? When I first started teaching, I was really leaning a lot on what other people told me was excellence. And by the end of my time as a classroom teacher, I really started to work more collaboratively with students so that we could define what excellence looked like for us in our classroom. Because depending on your environment, depending on your student body, depending on a whole lot of independent factors, your definition of excellence may differ from someone else's. And that doesn't mean that there is one standard for excellence that is flat. I think that's a common misconception. What literature is worthy of academic study? A lot of times we tend to think that the canon, the classical canon that has predominantly white male authors, those are the works that are held up as sort of the epitome of what everyone else needs to know and learn about in order to function in this society. So that leaves out a whole lot of lived realities and experiences. Also, whose cultural capital is given more space in the curriculum? If you've got to study 5 years of Shakespeare, so you've got Shakespeare every single year, then that's a certain cultural capital belonging predominantly to white Europeans that is given more space than others. So that's something to consider. Whose cultural capital is given more space in the curriculum? And then what nuances exist within a given ethnic or cultural identity? It's not like we just discovered the fact that there are folks who have intersectional identities. This has been around for a while. And so just because you maybe only identify with one certain ethnic or cultural identity doesn't mean that others who share your identity might not have some intersections in other places. What forms of literacy are given dominance over others? When we think about the fact that the written word is prized as the epitome of what an academic person can do, can achieve. There are also podcasts that a lot of folks are learning from. There are graphic novels that our students love. There is a great Disrupt Text chat that we had on deconstructing the different genres that we use to think about what is worthy of academic study. And then how many canons are there? I love what Tricia says often, that the canon is a social construction. And this is something that exists in a lot of different societies. There are many different canons. And so for us to think erroneously that there is one canon, or that there is one canon that should be supreme, that is very problematic. And it can be very damaging for those of us who might come from the margins or from cultures that have been decentered. So as we think about Pillar 1, the rationale for considering Pillar 1 is understanding that any piece of literature is inherently limited in its perspective, and that literature written by white authors specifically tends to exclude or misrepresent the experiences of Black, Indigenous people of color. We can think most famously about To Kill a Mockingbird and the Black characters in that book. And often people will say, well, it's just a reflection of its time. But we've got to understand, and this is something that Lorena is going to talk about a little bit more later, it is possible to read that text with a critical lens. And Tricia will talk more about that as well. And it is important and necessary because it was authored by a white person who had a limited view of the lived realities and experiences of people of color. And that still continues to this day. Not all BIPOC literature or experiences are the same. So it's important to understand that just because you have your token one book by an Asian author doesn't mean that that one author should stand in the place of having many different authors from many different places. Literature cannot be divorced from social, political, and cultural contexts in which it's written and read. So we've got to understand that literature, of course, is a product of the social, political, and cultural context surrounding its inception. All right, so what can you do? Well, start where you are, but don't stay there. And here are some ways that you can move forward in your understanding of what it means to really dive into this work and interrupt the biases that you might be working with in your instruction and as you plan curriculum with others. We've all heard of How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. This one really delves into what it might mean to work toward a society where people are not only not racist, but are anti-racist. So you are actively working every day to undo the racist structures within us and within our society. White Rage gives the unspoken truth of our racial divide. It says it there very clearly. Carol Anderson is incredible. White Fragility is going to help you understand why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. And it says that on the cover, but I want you to understand that, you know, when we look at whiteness, we have to understand too that over 60% of the teaching force is white people. So they're informing the way that the rest of us learn. Soon, the majority of students in the United States will be students of color, which leads us to the Anti-Racist Teacher Reading Instruction Workbook, authored by Lorena Germán. This is a way that you can go into your reading instruction and sort of start to dismantle the ways that you might be consciously or unconsciously, because we focus on impact, not always just intention. How can you work consciously and intentionally to do the anti-racist work in literacy instruction? Here are some tools that can help you expand your world with your students. So these are things that you can do together with your students and in community. We've got, of course, So You Want to Talk About Race, which is a great community book club choice. This book is anti-racist. Tiffany will talk about a little bit later on today in the gathering, which I'm really excited to see and hear her talk because she's phenomenal. But it's got some lessons for people of all ages, but specifically young people, to focus on what it means to work toward being anti-racist. And then Not Light But Fire by Matthew R.K. is how you can lead meaningful race conversations in the classroom. It's really important for teachers, I think, specifically curriculum teams, to look at how they can lead meaningful conversations within their organizations about race and its role in the classroom. And then we've heard of Stamped, of course, by Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi. We gave away a few copies of this at our presentation at NCTE, and it was really exciting just to be able to empower folks to re-envision what they have been told was our history, because there are lots of stories that have been left out of the dominant narrative of how history has gone in this country. All right, so consider ways to empower your students. You can involve them in the practice of decolonizing thinking. We've got Borderlands La Frontera there, which is really great, I think, for empowering folks who live at the borderlands, because they might specifically geographically live there, but then also be living in a place where they speak 2 or more languages. So Borderlands La Frontera has really been a text that I've used with my students to help them understand what it might mean to live, but then also write about living in that space between languages and cultures. Voces Sin Fronteras is a graphic novel that talks about, it's comics from Latin American folks, and it's what's beautiful about it, and this And They Call Us Enemy, is that it takes graphic novels, so you can argue that a graphic novel is worthy of academic study, but it allows students to see that they could tell their story with pictures as well, and that's totally valid. And then Lifting as We Climb is the Black women's battle for the ballot box. And this taught me a lot of history that I did not know. And so I think that it's a really empowering text about how we can come to understand the hidden stories, sort of like Hidden Figures. But this one is a social studies kind of tie-in. How can we look at collectively and individually empowering our students to move beyond the way of operating in society that marginalizes and erases lived realities, specifically those of people of color. Okay. So we can also recognize the ways we're all complicit in perpetuating systemic oppression and consequently responsible for dismantling it. I won't go through all of these because I feel like they speak for themselves, but my two favorites here are teaching to transgress and we want to do more than survive. So understanding what it means to really be an abolitionist teacher, and then understanding what it means to teach to transgress or overcome the ways that we have used teaching to oppress actually, and to perpetuate a status quo that leaves many people out, is these are some books that can help with that. All right, so Audre Lorde says that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So we have got to think in new ways about dismantling what education has looked like, and we have to start from within. So what I love about this quote is the fact that we cannot use the systemic tools of oppression to dismantle the systemic tools of oppression. You've got to do things differently. So we've got to look to indigenous ways, to Black cultural traditions, to indigenous Black people of color have a way of doing things very differently, not only with regard to our canon and cultural capital, but with regard to our cultural norms and the way that we see education. And I think that it's really powerful to examine the biases that we have within us. Many of us, all of us have biases, but I think that we have intentionally or unintentionally diminished or excluded those that we don't understand. And so this is an opportunity to do and see things differently. All right. So again, start where you are, but don't stay there. Look for and share tools that'll help you expand your world. We gave some books, and then you can consider ways to empower your students by involving them in the process. Lorena is going to talk more about decolonizing thinking. And you can also recognize the ways that we are all complicit in perpetuating systemic oppression and responsible. We are all complicit and all responsible. And I'll just add here, Clear the Air is a hashtag that you can follow on Twitter, where you can get involved in some discussions about how to actively dismantle systemic oppression. Use some different tools. All right, so what does it mean to decolonize your thinking? Lorena is going to talk a little bit more about that. How does your praxis, pedagogy plus practice, serve as an example of your beliefs in action? So what do you believe? And then how do your beliefs show up in what you do? And then what does it mean to have a self-reflective stance? So how are you always looking to other examples of leadership? And then how do these examples represent diverse perspectives and lived realities? Are you always looking to the same 5 predominantly white leadership voices in education? Or are you looking to expand who you see as educational leaders, but also who your students see as potential exemplars when they're looking to model their writing after authors? And then how is your canon a social construct? What does it reveal about your perceptions of society? Again, there's an italicized word, your canon. How is that a social construct? Because your canon is not everyone's canon, and it's important to remember that. All right, handing it over to Lorena.
Thank you, Julia. I know I heard you talk about this already, but that was just really, it's always so good to hear all of that and to listen to the process. And yeah, so what I want to focus on is the second pillar, which is to center Black, Indigenous, and voices of color in literature. And that's our second pillar because the first one, right, if we're thinking about this procedurally, then the first one is to start with the self and to think about what in your own practice is perpetuating harm. And so once we go through the process as individuals, as teachers, and we start to unpack some of our own biases and we decenter our voices and our biases, then what are we going to center, right? What are we going to actually do in our classrooms with students? And so what we want to propose is that you center Black, Indigenous, and voices of color in literature, because we are the ones that have been historically and intentionally marginalized. So I had been inspired by a tweet that Tricia had done where she created like a visual representation of some authors for us. I think it was in Children's Lit. And so I was inspired to do this, to create a visual representation for us. And so much of our canon is centered on the white gaze, written by white male authors in particular. And the pictures that you see here are the pictures of the authors of the titles of the bottom of this slide. And all of those texts are your very typical and traditional, canonical books that are being read in high school and many in middle school as well. And so this list I gathered from a number of different, just trust me and believe me, but you could also do it yourself. You can type all kinds of things like top high school books, common high school literature, like all of the tags that you want, and you're gonna get this list of books with your, several token ones of people of color. Probably Their Eyes Were Watching God, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and something by Frederick Douglass. Those are the three that were like sprinkled and never like in the top 10, but maybe like number 11. And so I think this gives us a visual of the voices that our young people have been reading for a very long time. These books were written forever ago, a lifetime ago. Many of us who teach today were not even born when some of these books were written, and yet we continue to uphold them as classical, as traditional, as worthy of academic study, a phrase that you're going to hear us use often when we have these conversations, because that's the message we send to students, and that's the message also that their parents receive, is that these are the books that are worthy of building lessons around, building an entire curriculum on, and investing money in, right? Because these books cost money to purchase at schools. And so we continue as institutions to spend money on these books and pay these people and their publishers. And so, that's something to think about, is to take in this visual. And this is what we say when we talk about the fact that the canon, or what is known as the canon, is predominantly white. This is what we mean, okay? So the message that's received is that this canon is for white people, it's by white people, and it's about white people. And even just saying that is exhausting. Just repeated those same words 3 times. And so imagine, going through school from, let's say, 5th grade to, and I mean, I'm being really conservative, but 5th grade through, let's say 10th or 11th grade, and that has been the bulk of your work. It's been those types of books and books similar to those. And if you haven't chosen texts, or let's say as a student, right, I'm sitting through these classes, and some of the books that I have read are then not, just to go back to Julia's point about which voices do come in, right? And if they're always the one book that maybe my teacher taught me one time that was by an African-American person or someone who was Latino or Asian, and then it's saturated in pain and in suffering, then that's the one time I got to supposedly see myself in curriculum. And so then this begs the question, well, what about the rest of us? What about the complexity of everyone else? And so this slide is meant to just help us to start thinking about what are all the different voices. And this is not by any means inclusive of all of the identities in this country, right? But what we need to think about is people at the intersections and people in the margins. And so this box here is meant to say, what if all of these identities were inside the dominant narratives, right? Like, what if the dominant narratives in our schools actually were inclusive of all of these people? If we actually read texts by undocumented persons, whether that's in the form of a printed article or audio from them, or what if we actually had a text by an African author or someone who was indigenous, or we had, you know, multiple voices of women of color, or we welcomed a unit that was all about immigrants, let's say, from countries other than Europe. And so that's something for us to think about, is how, you know, to go beyond the black-white binary into a more inclusive and even expansive curriculum. Because even within the Black community, and in this case, I'm talking about African Americans here when I say Black, even within the Black community, there is so much diversity, there's so much complexity. And so we need to also try to be inclusive and representative of those voices. And so why, hold on, I'm trying to move this thing so I can read what it says. There you go. So why do we need to do this? I guess this is kind of us trying to make this argument for the skeptics out there, but also for ourselves, so that we are equipped and ready to defend our practices, but also be firm in our practices. So first of all, we need to center these voices because race continues to be the largest determinant of inequity across areas of life. We are seeing it right now in our current global pandemic, the way that it's playing out right here in the United States. We see it in every area of life, whether you're talking about education, health, you know, economy, housing. I mean, like literally in any area of this United States, of any focus of, you know, institutions, you're going to see that race continues to be a large determinant of inequity. And because we need to address and fill the racial imagination gap. Dr. Ebony Thomas talks about this in her book, The Dark Fantastic, which I highly recommend. Just the introduction alone and the first chapter. I'm sure probably some of the other chapters, but definitely those two, I think are really gonna help you to understand this idea of the racial imagination gap. And she talks a lot about and helps us understand the ways that, you know, as we continue to center those voices that I just pictured, we end up having this gap in our imagination as a society of who people of color can be and who they actually are. And so also we do this because we need to challenge the problematic, violent, and incorrect dominant narratives that exist about us. Dr. Alim and Dr. Paris talk about that in Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies, where you know, they break down just the ways that you know, our voices have been written for us in some ways, when you've got white authors in particular writing books about us. And so we need to challenge those narratives, those the discourse that surrounds our identity. And then lastly, because the silence around race in ELA classrooms has existed long enough, and it literally it has led us both where we are and where we are not, right? So it has limited us and it has brought us to this point. And Toni Morrison talks about that in, now I'm forgetting the book, which is terrible. Playing in the Dark. And so all of these ideas hopefully invite us to consider why there is a need to do this work. And so I'll read the quote at the bottom from Dr. Thomas's book. This imagination gap is caused in part by a lack of diversity in books, films, and TV. Our imaginations become confined to single stories about the world around us. And a painful product of all of this is the implicit message that readers, hearers, and viewers of color receive as they read these texts is that we are the villains. And so it's really important for us to think about, how do we allow people of color to speak for themselves? And so how do we center this? Because I think, you know, because in Distrupt Texts, part of what we're doing really is asking everyone, and doing this in our own practice, is to reimagine, right? Like, we have to reinvent the wheel, unfortunately. And so how can we actually center some of these voices? Well, we've thought about 3 steps. First, strategically pairing. So finding alternative viewpoints, a text that offers a window and one that's a mirror. And a lot of you know that that comes from Dr. Bishop's work. Pairings that offer different main characters. And so that's how we can disrupt some of those narratives. Intentionally replacing. Yes, you can replace a book, especially if you have the autonomy to do so. Your children will be okay. Your students are going to make it. So use books that address the same themes, topics, and ideas as classical ones, because that's often the defense, right? But they're inclusive of marginalized voices. And you can also just replace it altogether and just offer a completely new book and unit. You are free to do so in many schools. But because we know that there are also many of you who are in districts where you do not have choice, you do not have the autonomy to replace text, that's why we offer the option to strategically pair. And then I think that developing counter narratives is a thing we can all do in our classrooms. A core text is not required. And so it's somewhat of a process, and you can just wait for the book, because that's where we're gonna break it down. But you can identify the narratives, research and read to understand the truth and demystify what's happening with that narrative, and then talk about truth. And truth is really at the core too of this work of disrupting text. And so a little bit on counter narratives. We never notice, and this also comes from Dr. Thomas's book, but we never notice that monsters, fantastic beasts, and various dark others are silenced because we have never been taught the language that they speak. And that to me was just really mind-blowing in the way that she described that. Critical race counter storytelling provides both translation and amplification for these subsumed narratives. And so that is part of the work that we're trying to do. That's really at the core of centering these voices, is allowing them, us, to speak for ourselves, to contest the narratives that we are always conquered, that we are always defeated, that we are always less than, but that instead we're the opposite, right? That we are conquerors, that we are, that we thrive and we don't just survive, and that there's joy in our lives as well, in addition to that pain. And then I'll pass it on.
Okay, thanks, Lorena. I was writing down some notes that I wanted to remember to come back to. But I think at this point in sort of our walking through these core principles, again, we want to think about where our biases are coming from and continuously interrogate them, and then thinking about how we are going to use text strategically, as Lorena just described. But the thing is that even if you, well, I want to say that, even if you, have texts that are written by or about people of color, if you are someone who is a racially unconscious teacher, or even worse, racially disconscious, and that's where you think you know, but you actually don't know, you can do more harm than good. You know, even a text that is written by a person of color in the hands of a racially unconscious or disconscious teacher, you can and will do harm in terms of how you might be perpetuating dominant narratives. And that's really what this particular core principle is about how we can apply a critical lens. And so first, we just want to take a quick look at what do we mean by critical lens theory. So we have to think about, again, how the world is a socially constructed place, right? And we can analyze it. And so it's not just about the knowledge that we acquire in school, but also the meaning that we ascribe to that knowledge. So think about all the different things you've learned. You know that some things are more important than others. Well, who said they were more important than others? We get those messages from the ways our teachers treat text, and the ways in which teachers treat characters, and the way teachers treat issues that can be discussed and then are pushed to the margins because they're considered quote unquote controversial. And so therefore there's no neutral, right? Texts are a product of a specific context and process. And so when we think about applying a critical lens, it's not just about like a checklist of things that we can do, but really it's about a mindset and approach that we have to think about when we are looking at any text. So it's really about being active and engaged versus passive and consumptive. So you think about Freire's banking model, right? We are not just like banking, we're not just putting knowledge into children, but we want to think about ways that we can co-construct knowledge together. And co-construction of knowledge means to take what is given and to create it or to reconstruct it in a way that we are better able to move forward. Hi, Kitty. I see Julia's cat in the background. Okay, so again, all knowledge is socially constructed, and therefore, go to the next slide. The canon is also a construction, and we have to think about who constructed it, for what purpose, what and whom does it center, and of course, who benefits and at whose expense. This is the thing that I always ask my students to think about, that last question especially. You know, when they ask questions like, well, why is it like that? Or why is this policy this way? Or how did we come to this? And I always ask, well, who benefits from it being this way? And then I kind of let that question sit there a little bit. And again, that's a moment where I think we can think about how to apply that critical lens. Okay. So we have to think about how we can, again, take moments to intentionally support the development of critical consciousness in our students. And we do that by really making space and modeling it for us. So when Julia walks through, like, how do we think about our own biases? How can we expect students to think about their biases when they are looking at a text and reading if we don't model that for them, right? We have to model what it means to look at something and to think about, I used to think, and now I think differently because I have new knowledge and I'm constructing new knowledge right now as I'm getting new information and new perspectives. And so one way we can do that is through literature, right? And so when we think about dominant narratives, and this has already been mentioned, we can think about the ways in which dominant narratives are really those borders that bell hooks ask us to transgress, right? Dominant narratives are a form of a border and boundary that schools construct, and we have to think about how we can push beyond that. And so whenever I start a text, I know we all know this as teachers, you know, one of the first things we learn in teacher school is about, like, we have to always activate prior knowledge, right? But no one ever talks about how that prior knowledge is, again, socially constructed, right? The prior knowledge and the schema that students are bringing into the classroom is often one that is based on the dominant narratives they have about the world and especially about people of color. And so we have to be intentional about asking students to identify that as a dominant narrative that is socially constructed rather than something that is inherently true. Right? Like, they didn't just come to, by the time I get students in high school, they have all sorts of opinions, they have all sorts of preconceptions and misconceptions, and they didn't just, those things didn't just happen in the world. You know, in their lived experience has brought them to that truth about other people. And so we have to help them understand that that lived experience has been constructed by a series of choices that they have made, that the media has made, that their parents have made. So when we look at a text, for example, as Julia said earlier, you know, no text is inherently, you know, not biased. All of them have a bias. They're all limited in their perspective. So when we think about characters, we can ask ourselves, you know, who in a book, and, you know, we have to teach these literary devices anyway. So we can ask ourselves, well, what does it mean to be a major character? And what does it mean to be a minor character? Well, who are the voices and who are the characters who get to be fully well developed and rounded? And what does race have to do with this, right? Like, let's really take a look. And of course, To Kill a Mockingbird is a great example. It's probably the classic example to teach in terms of, like, what not to do in terms of how to draw these sort of stock and stereotypical characters. One of the texts that we teach at my school is The Crucible, and I spend so much time really thinking about that character of Tituba and, like, how she's constructed in Arthur Miller's imagination, and, like, what does that mean that she is the first scapegoat there in that book, and how is she portrayed, and, like, having kids think about, like, what is their reaction to her, like, having kids really focus on, like, the characters who are minor rather than only focusing on the characters who are major, as if those are the characters who deserve to only be talked about or treated as, you know, full, you know, even if the author is not treating the character as a fully developed human being, we can ask kids to do that, right? We can ask kids to think about what else is missing from this perspective, right? Who is round versus flat, right? Who gets to change? Who gets to be dynamic versus static? And the other thing we can think about too is this problem of universalizing. So I think when early in my career, and I'll really reveal a bias of my own, you know, one of the, I guess you could say the, what's the word I'm looking for now? One of the justifications I had, or one of the rationales I had for teaching certain books, is because I had really bought into this idea that some books are universal, right? We teach Shakespeare because he is like the human, like he encompasses all of humanity. And I still hear that many people use that kind of, you know, thinking, right? The invention of human, I think, is Harold Bloom's whole thing on Shakespeare, right? And so we can ask ourselves, well, like, who gets to say what's human and who gets to say what's universal? And so we can ask kids to think about that, so that we can ask kids to identify, well, the dominant narrative about this text, The Lord of the Flies, is that it is about the human condition and about the evil in all of mankind. And yet we know that other communities, especially people of color who have a more collective mindset, I'm not sure that Lord of the Flies has the result it does, right? If we don't name, we can name for kids, well, this is white British boys, you know, during, you know, World War II. That's a very different specific demographic than just thinking about, like, maybe people of color right now trying to get through this pandemic, right? Like, let's think about more honestly and more critically about like how we might resist universalizing what are really white experiences or flaws, right? And think about how, other communities and other perspectives would approach this. Let me go to the next slide. Yes. So again, a lot of this has to do with, I think one of the ways that I've tried to approach this as a teacher is to think about how I can build a text set that is more diverse and inclusive to develop those multiple perspectives, like Lorena was saying. And so when we walk through a text with students, we can ask them these questions, right? We can ask them whose perspectives are still missing in this text, right? Who are the voices who we are not hearing from? Who are the voices who are marginalized within the text, and who's altogether missing? And then also thinking about how is my understanding then limited because I don't have these perspectives in front of me? What is the thing that I am losing because it's a loss? And then what is gained by having these perspectives, and what questions does this raise? What did I know that, what didn't I know before that I now know now? And we can help kids walk through that by thinking about their identities, right? If we're going to walk through, again, model how our own biases have led us to certain ways of reading text, then we can ask kids to do the same. We can ask them to think about how their identities, experiences, and biases have informed their reading of characters, right? We can think about in their independent reading choices, like how are they making choices and selections of text based on these previous biases, right? How can they be more critically conscious in terms of why are they reacting to a character the way they're reacting in the particular moment? Why are they still drawn to particular texts over time? And one way we might frame this, that I frame this for kids, is to think about, this sort of like skeleton of a framework, right? As a person who, and then they can identify their, who they are, how do they see this issue, and because in their experience, again, that's a lived experience, but they can also recognize that their view is limited, right? And then more critically, what's the action step? The action step is to think about how they might deepen their understanding of an issue and what are the additional questions that they have to consider. Again, all the things that I just walked through, I know it sounds like, okay, well, that sounds great in theory, Tricia, but what does this look like in my context? So remember again, that applying a critical lens is also being aware of the context in which you are creating this knowledge. And so each of these 4 different contexts are going to have very different maybe dynamics. That's just something as a teacher to consider, limitations and advantages. And just a quick note here, of course, to Gloria Ladson-Billings, to think about how a lot of our teaching, when we think about our critical lens, really means about being culturally relevant as well in our pedagogy, to think about these 3 core parts of culturally relevant pedagogy, about having high academic expectations for all of our students, having cultural competency to know and understand how different communities and people work, and to have a social consciousness so that we can question the status quo and systems. And so, as Sonia Sanchez says, all poets and all writers are political. So you either maintain the status quo or you say something like, something's wrong, let's change it for the better. And with that said, and thinking about changing things for the better, we are going to move to Dr. Parker.
Thanks, Tricia. I think that it's really sort of, it's timely right now, because I think the 4th principle that we'll talk about is to work in community with other anti-racist educators, especially Black, Indigenous, and other educators of color. And I think that we have never needed community more. And I think it's really interesting that we have to figure out what community means in this moment. And I've been thinking too about this image from AEB Art, which talks really about community being on accountability, or community is built on accountability. And really, the 3 principles that came before are important, but if they're not done in community, then it's essentially like one person against the machine. And what we really focus on is the importance of systems, right? Focusing our work on organizing and systems. And so thinking about some of these key points that are on this table, right? Can you go back? Thank you. Interdependence, love, inclusion, self-awareness, authenticity, decolonization, vulnerability, humility, trust. all of these are key components of accountable communities. And that's what we are really striving to understand and to be, particularly thinking about how are we doing that for each other, especially now? And what does that look like given that our communities are sort of spread out, are now virtual, are limited because of physical distancing and fear and inability for whatever reason, right? And so then how do we create these linkages to each other in ways that are powerful and important? And so then we think about working in community, and we say, I'm working, right? Because it's a constant action, and we never sort of get there really, but we're working towards it. So a couple of key components include centering BIPOC voices, particularly those who do not receive the recognition they deserve. And again, right, I think our whole platform really is about making sure that our wheels turn on that foundation of people who really are our scholars, our folks, and thinking about how do we make sure that everyone else knows that too. Understanding, honoring, and promoting BIPOC knowledge production. I've been really thinking about this because we have an issue about whose voice or authority do we recognize, particularly now when we talk about equity, right? I think that equity is this issue that seems to be sort of all over the news, all over social media. But what I'm also struck by is that the people who are being called to do the equity work are often not BIPOCs, right? Are not necessarily people who are doing the work and have the lived experience to talk about that. And that says a lot, right? What do we value by the choices we make? Also, working in community means knowing who the community connectors are and listening to them. Mr. Rogers has the quote, in times of emergency to look for the helpers. And I've been really taken with thinking about who are the helpers that are in our neighborhoods right now. I know that in my community, we're really thinking about what does it mean to get food to kids, computers to kids, access to kids. And I don't know if we're necessarily talking to the people who are within the communities who are not, like affiliated with the school district, but who know the community, who know the children, and who know the families. And so what does that mean when we're not necessarily drawing on those people, but what would it mean if we actually did, right? If we valued those people for the connectors and the helpers that we know that they already are. And addressing anti-Blackness, right? Anti-Blackness is everywhere. And also we wanna think a lot about how have particular groups benefited from anti-Blackness, and what does that mean to address it continually, to call it out, to work to actively dismantle it, and why does that matter? Also, working in community means to work relentlessly towards liberation, right? We are all trying to get free, but that also means that we have to be in service with instead of saving, right? That's the key difference. We're not trying to save anyone, but we are working together, and really working together, not just like to get a t-shirt, but to think about, right, like what does it mean when your liberation is tied to mine? We believe in decentering whiteness, right? And that really means that we are thinking about a world where we are not tied to white norms, white ways of being, that instead, again, it goes back to honoring BIPOC knowledge, ways that knowledge is produced, that there's something else. And this is a constant ongoing act to really think about. We love it that we do have white co-conspirators, right? They stand up, they speak up, they actively do the work. And we borrow from Embracing Equity here, who says that to be a white co-conspirator is to be in constant, consistent action, right? So it's not sort of a one act thing. It's always working on yourself as a white co-conspirator, and also working for the liberation for BIPOC communities. And then finally, to building intergroup community beyond the white gaze. I think we have a lot of work to do among ourselves, and we need to think really deeply about what that means and what that looks like, and how do we keep doing it, right? What are our rituals and routines? What are our habits? What are the ways that we love each other? What are the ways that we argue? What are the ways that we build our own critical consciousness? What are the ways that we are each other's harvest and each other's bond? And again, it comes back to accountability. And we do love Audre Lorde. Julia sort of cited her and cited her again, right? Without community, there's no liberation. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. So what do we do now, right? And I think that it's really easy to get sort of caught up in thinking about there's so much to do and you don't know where to start. This is where the work of Elena Aguilar is critical in getting us to action. Her spheres of control remind us to think about what you can control in the center, this green, the center of the circle, right? And then also the blue, what you can influence. If we focus on these two areas, we'll realize that we have a tremendous ability to change our communities, to work in our communities, and then we work outward, and that work then begins to really change the world. And we really do believe that we can change the world. And I think that we've had too many people do the work and are doing the work that makes us believe that it's possible, right? And that, again, focusing on what you can control. And first, you can control our own biases, our own beliefs, our own ways we show up. Who are the people and the groups that we count in our community? And then to scope out, to go a little bit broader, to think about the ways that we can influence those groups also, and the ways that those groups influence us. We will realize that we do have the tremendous ability to make lasting, substantive change. And then once we realize that, we get angry to go to Toni Morrison, and then we go to work. Lorena.
So just to wrap up, core principles, okay? And I think this slide might be a good moment to pause, and also maybe you want to take a screenshot for yourself and take your own notes. But just to wrap up, the core principles to how to do this work: first, interrogate your own biases continuously and understand how they inform your teaching. Center Black, Indigenous, and voices of color in literature, in your curriculum, in everything that you do. Apply a critical lens to your teaching practices, right? So both for yourself and students. And then work in community with other anti-racist educators, especially folks of color, and providing, but also receiving accountability. And that's how we're gonna get this done. Tricia?
So when you think about these 4 core principles, I'm gonna go to the next slide, you can think about them as the 4 walls of a room, right? So if you take one of the walls away, the room just sort of, the ceiling collapses and you're sort of left crushed under systemic oppression. Think of it that way. You're crushed by systemic oppression. So you have to think about how can we keep the walls and the support going? And the room can't stand when one wall is weak or missing. So again, think of it this way. It's not, we introduced it as steps, but it's really not steps. It's really all at once, continuously, and, just continuously mindful and purposeful action. And now we'll go to Julia. Yeah.
All right, so this is where you can scan the QR code. You can get your Distrupt Text gear. We have some awesome shirts that lots of folks like to wear so that they can have conversations with people who are about the work. They've got some quotes. We've got quotes from Bell Hooks, Grace Lee Boggs, Sonia Sanchez, Toni Morrison. I have I think I have one of the black t-shirts, and then I have the older Distrupt Text hoodie, the original vintage Distrupt Text hoodie, but I definitely want to get one of these pink shirts, and hopefully in the future we'll have some other options for you as well. But we want to make sure that you will, if you want to win one of the shirts, can you go back just real quick? you want to win one of the shirts, you follow us today on our Twitter account, and we will be choosing a winner, probably a few actually, from those who follow just during the window of the EdCollab gathering. We'll choose a winner, and I'll reach out to you, and we will set you up with the size and model of shirt that you would like, so you can engage in these conversations in your community. And then we've also got the website, of course, that shows you how to participate, where you can see us presenting, which will most likely be virtually for the foreseeable future. But yeah, please use the resources on the website. There are a lot of folks who are in the community who have contributed essays. And then we also have some Twitter moments that capture the highlights from our chats. And those can be really informative when you're having discussions in your community.
So we want to wrap up, and we want to thank you for joining us. We know that this is a difficult time. It's a difficult time for us. But we appreciate you today, following us, supporting this work, doing this work. And we also just want to highlight how important it is for us to keep this in mind, even in the middle of this pandemic, because we know that it will end, it will be over. And a lot of people are saying everywhere in real life, on social media, like, oh, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. And that scares me. I don't want to go back to normal. I want to go back to a better way. I want to go back to a place where, Disrupt Text is not a novelty. It's not a thing that is foreign to folks, but it's part of our instruction. And so if we can do this work, if we can share with others, if we can invest time now, then hopefully we can go back to a better way. So thank you for coming. Y'all want to say bye and unmute like they do in my kids' preschool classes? Everybody shout.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.